You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 2nd of May 2025 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, coming to you live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Emma Nelson, and coming up on today's programme.
The American presence will, I think, keep a lot of bad actors out of the country, or certainly out of the area where we're doing the digging.
Has the minerals deal between the US and Ukraine silenced Moscow for now at least? With no response from the Kremlin, we'll examine how much momentum this gives to Kiev. Also ahead in the next 30 minutes, with 4 Polish cardinals taking part in the papal conclave, we look at the expectations of a nation where 7 out of 10 citizens identify as Catholic. We'll also ask how the recent political upheaval in South Korea will shape the forthcoming presidential elections, and we fire the starting gun on Hollywood's summer season, don't we, Fernando Augusto Pacheco?
Absolutely, Emma. Today we preview the summer box office, and I ask you, who's going to win, dinosaurs or Superman?
Superman. That's all coming up right here on The Briefing, live from London. And we begin today's programme by asking, does signing a deal with Ukraine signify a cooling of Washington's warmth towards Russia? Kyiv would certainly hope so, given the work needed to make yesterday's US-Ukraine minerals agreement happen. And the wording used by Washington certainly indicates a hardening of attitude. The agreement refers to Russia's full-scale invasion, and the US Treasury Department adds that no state or person who financed or supplied the Russian war machine will be allowed to benefit from the reconstruction of Ukraine. Well, I'm joined now by Oleksii Goncharenko, who's a Ukrainian Member of Parliament. A very good afternoon to you, Alex.
Hi.
Let us begin with this enabling of Ukraine, now able to purchase US weapons on a sort of lend-lease basis. This must give you a renewed sense of vigour.
Yeah, but I can't name it exactly a lend-lease system, because lend-lease system, when you're using weapons, and if it will be destroyed or used, or you don't want to give it back, in this case, you're paying for this, or you just use it and giving it back. So that was the idea of Lend-Lease. It's quite a different idea. But in any way, that's important for us because United States is our ally number one and absolutely critical source of military support.
And this critical source of military support is something that had been very much doubted in the last few weeks and had given the outside world at least the sense that the United States was moving more towards Russia and being warmer towards Russia. Does this agreement, this minerals deal, now signify a cooling of passion by the United States for Moscow?
I hope so. We did everything President Trump wanted. He wanted Ukraine to agree on unconditional ceasefire. We agreed. He wanted us to sign a mineral deal. We did it. So now I hope he will finally put pressure on Russia, because Russia is not doing what he wants. Russia is not agreeing on peace. Russia doesn't want to stop the war. So I hope now President Trump finally will put pressure on them, because in other case, we will not reach peace.
We have already signs of this happening. Senator Lindsey Graham warning that the United States could impose more sanctions on Russia and could also punish trade partners for doing business with it by imposing tariffs on anybody who buys Russian oil and gas. What difference would that make to you in Ukraine?
That would be fantastic if it would be done, because it will mean that Russia will lose its partners in selling of Russian oil. And this is the main source of Russian war chest. So this is a very good news if it will happen. I hope it will happen. And I'm sure even that if President Trump will do this, Putin will be at negotiation table and he will be really willing to speak seriously. These and one more thing is sanctions against Russian shadow fleet, which transport Russian oil. This is really a super important sanctions, which will have devastating effect on Russian economy.
How much faith should Kyiv have in the Trump administration to stay the course, There is this fear, this reputation that Donald Trump can change his mood, his idea and his direction in an instant. And the victory and the commitment that Kyiv may well be celebrating today could be extremely short-lived were Donald Trump to take a more transactional view with Moscow.
We're not in church. It's not about faith. It's about what we are doing, everything we can. And we hope that it will give results. And I don't think that President Trump wants to show himself as a loser, because he said that he will end the war. Definitely when he said that he will do it in one day, it was probably rhetoric. It was clear that it is impossible. But now he has a real chance to end the war. But for this, he needs to sanction Russia and to put pressure on them. And if he will not do this, that will mean that Putin won over him. I don't think that President Trump wants to be a loser. And that's why I hope he will finish this job and he will be really in history as a peacemaker.
We already have, however, the departure of Mike Waltz as a security advisor and Marco Rubio now doing both that job and the US Secretary of State. This has happened just on the outside of 100 days of Donald Trump's administration. There is a sense that the foundations of an administration, when in Donald Trump's hands, may not be that solid. So how much must Kyiv now learn to pivot to whoever occupies whichever seat?
I don't think it matters too much. I think it's clear to everybody that there is one person who makes decisions, who takes decisions in the United States. It's Donald Trump. Everybody else can be changed and they're not there. They can consult, they can advise, but that all decisions are made by one person. This is the reality of what we have now in the United States. So I don't think it will change significantly who exactly is, for example, national security advisor.
And how will this change Russia's perspective? Now no longer, having enjoyed perhaps a temporary few months of Donald Trump very much warming to Moscow, does Russia actually need the United States to win its full-scale invasion of Ukraine? Can it not rely on its newer, more willing friends, such as India?
I will not call India to be Russian big friend. So Russian friends are North Korea, Iran, all these axis of chaos. This is Russian friends. India is more neutral. Speaking about Putin, he's afraid of the United States of America and he's afraid of Trump. Russia is afraid of two countries in the world, China and the United States. So he will try to play games, but he is afraid of these countries. We can't count on China, but we count on the United States. So for Russia, it's super important what the United States do and what they think.
Oleksii Goncharenko, thank you so much for joining us on the line. The time here in London is 8 minutes past midday. You're listening to The Briefing with me, Emma Nelson. A look now at the day's other news headlines with Carlotta Rebella.
Thanks, Emma. Israel has launched airstrikes near the presidential palace in Damascus. Further military action could follow to force Syrian authorities to protect its Druze people from what the minorities leader called a genocidal campaign amid ongoing sectarian violence. The strikes pose a serious challenge to the Islamist authorities in Syria, who ousted longtime ruler Bashar al-Assad in December. US President Donald Trump has signed an executive order aiming to slash public subsidies to PBS and NPR. The move comes as his administration has been working to dismantle the US Agency for Global Media, including Voice of America and Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. Trump has alleged bias in the broadcasters' reporting. And a $35 afternoon tea set served at the British Pavilion at the Osaka Expo has caused a stir on Japanese social media. A post deploring the overall quality of the pavilion's tea set, including a tea bag stuck in a paper cup, went viral online. The paper cups have now been replaced by ceramics. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Emma.
Thank you very much indeed, Carlotta. Now, when the conclave begins next week in the Vatican City to begin the process of choosing a new pope, among the 120 cardinals who'll gather in the Sistine Chapel, there could be as many as 4 from Poland. The Polish voice is an important one, with 7 out of 10 citizens identifying as Roman Catholic. But the late Pope Francis appointed 20 cardinals who weren't European. So how loud could the Polish voice be? Well, Mateusz Mazzini is writer-at-large at Gazeta Wyborcza and a lecturer in journalism at Collegium Civitas in Warsaw. He joins me now from St. Peter's Square in the Vatican. Very good afternoon to you, Mateusz.
Very good afternoon to you. Thanks for having me.
And just to give a flavour of where you are, I mean, as a Pole, how many Polish voices are you being surrounded by on your trip to the Vatican?
Actually, quite a few, which should not come across as a surprise. I've been visiting Rome regularly over the last years, and there has always been a sizable contingent of Polish pilgrims, of Polish clergy, Polish priests, and just normal visitors. It's actually quite hard to make sense of who's here as a tourist, who's here as a pilgrim for the Jubilee, who's here anticipating the conclave that is going to begin next week. But there's certainly a visible Polish presence, as I said before, as per usual, as it always has been, at least for the last 20 or 25 years.
Well, let's focus on this conclave beginning next week. And the selection of cardinals, there are rules and regulations that govern the maximum number. Up to 4 Polish cardinals could be selected. I mean, how many are there that are likely to be chosen?
It's quite hard to say. None of the 4 Polish cardinals is being rumored to be included among the so-called papabili, which refers to the group of likely frontrunners or candidates to actually be selected the next pope. And they haven't been featuring prominently in any major doctrinal debate inside the Catholic Church over the last year. So I don't think they are likely to play a significant role in the upcoming conclave, at least not as protagonists, as ones that could be selected as next popes. They will definitely, though, have some say because they have a vote. And we know that the selection of the Pope more and more begins to resemble a political coalition building process in which we have various fractions, some of which are even openly associated with very specific political currents in their native countries. We have conservatives, largely led by the American cardinal contingent. We have Cardinal Erdo from Hungary, which is very often associated with some of the more conservative politics of the Orban regime domestically in his home country. And Polish cardinals, traditionally more conservative, people that were trying to wait out Pope Francis and most of his liberal reforms, are quite likely to be playing along the necessities and the demands of the conservative camp.
Because Poland is very much, as a country and its politics, is being pushed in 2 different directions, and that could be arguably a sort of an accurate reflection of where the Catholic Church wants to go, that there is that very strong sense of conservatism in Poland, but there also is a very strong modernising and progressive sense. In Poland itself, which one wins?
It's actually quite hard to give you a unilateral assessment because obviously, as you have mentioned before, at least 7 out of 10 Polish citizens identify as Catholic. But only a fraction of those, no more than 25% of the entire adult society, actually attends Mass on a regular basis. So it's largely habitual. It's because we have all been brought up in this shadow of John Paul II as a political figure rather than a spiritual one. The death of Pope Francis overlapped almost to the day with the 20th anniversary of the death of John Paul II. And that's a very significant coincidence because it shows how much has changed since Poland lost its Pope. It's no longer that much a Catholic country. The Catholic Church no longer exercises that much of a political influence, but the conservative forces that are still very powerful inside the Polish political scene still count on the support of the high members of the clergy, especially against some of the progressive reforms that are trying to be advanced by the current government of Donald Tusk. So whoever wins the conclave next week might actually play some symbolic role even in the ongoing presidential campaign in Poland, but it's quite hard to say whether that will help the Conservatives, help the Liberals, or actually play into the hands of the opposing camp.
Mateusz Mazzini in Rome, thank you so much for joining us on The Briefing. 2015 in Seoul, which is where we head now, because in South Korea, the country's politics have yet to settle after the impeachment of the country's president. What was once a nation which took pride in the success of its democracy now seems to be lurching from crisis to crisis. Yesterday was no exception. So to tell us more, I'm joined now by Hyun-Soo Yim, who's correspondent for Reuters in Seoul. Good evening.
Thank you for having me.
So 3 things happened yesterday, weren't they? There was a legal judgment and there were also some resignation. So it moved all rather fast.
Yes, so a lot has happened over the last 24 hours in South Korean politics. South Korea is holding a Senate presidential election after President Yoon was impeached for his short-lived imposition of martial law in December. And Prime Minister Han Duck-soo, who had been serving as acting president, announced his entry into the presidential race today after stepping down yesterday. And his announcement came after the Supreme Court reversed a lower court ruling on the election law violation case of Lee Jae-myung, who's the main opposition Democratic Party's presidential candidate, which sent his campaign into uncertainty with just 1 month to go before election day. So Lee is the most by far leading presidential candidate, and he was initially charged with making false statements when he was a candidate during the last election cycle. Then an appeals court cleared him of his charges until the top court sent the case back to a lower court to hear the case again. So if he's fined more than 1 million won, which is about $700 for violating the election law, he loses the right to run for office. And to make things even further complicated, Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok, who had been set to assume the position of acting president by law, he abruptly quit just before midnight on Thursday. He resigned because the opposition-led parliament was voting to impeach him over his earlier refusal as acting president to appoint a constitutional court judge. So what does this all mean? Well, our education minister, Lee Joo-ho, is now acting president after President Yoon, who was impeached and ousted for his martial law, and then Han and Choi. And this comes not least at a time when South Korea has just begun having trade talks with Washington, and at a time when North Korea is increasingly getting closer with Russia.
So in that context, we have, you mentioned 3 characters there, all of whom have either resigned in order to stand, and others who are either being either threatened with impeachment or indeed going through the legal courts because of election irregularities. What does this say about 2 things? Firstly, the ability of South Koreans to follow their own political story, and B, the ability of South Koreans to trust someone to lead them as president.
Yes, I think voters are processing the turn of events which had just happened, and we have yet to see polls reflecting the very eventful last few days. So until this week, things were clearer than now. Things were looking good for Lee, and people were hoping that after months of political turmoil that things could finally start to come down. But then in South Korea, voters, well, at least liberals and moderates, they are sick of the political turmoil caused by the martial law and the power vacuum that we have. And Lee's biggest weakness, the leading candidate, it was the legal risk. So when things were looking quite different when he won his appeal earlier this year, except few people expected the top court to rule on his case so swiftly. And Tomorrow, the ruling Conservative People Power Party will also put forward their candidate, and all eyes are on who will represent the right of the political spectrum in this country. But South Korean elections, in general, they're decided by swing voters, and we have a lot of them. So you will see the candidates trying their best to appeal to those on the middle of the political spectrum in the next 4 weeks. But yes, the political turmoil and the political gridlock and the tensions between the two major parties are making voters very tired.
Hyun-Soo Yim, thank you for joining us from Seoul. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. .20 here in London. Now let's get the latest business news. Ewan Potts joins me from Bloomberg. Good afternoon, Ewan.
Hi, Emma.
The US-China tariff standoff. Has anyone blinked?
Well, there are signs of a thawing in the very frosty, you might say frozen trade relationship between the world's two biggest economies. Today, it should be noted, is US jobs day. It's a key piece of economic data which the market is normally fascinated in. Not today. They don't really care. It is all about tariffs and trade. The S&P 500, the US benchmark stock index, has been on an incredible run over the last few sessions. It's actually heading for its 9th day higher, which will be the longest winning streak in 20 years. China is said it is assessing the possibility of trade talks with the United States. Commerce Ministry saying that it's noted that senior US officials have repeatedly expressed their willingness to talk to Beijing about tariffs. China is urging officials in Washington to show sincerity towards China. We've spoken to a former consultant to the Commerce Ministry. He likened the latest gesture to the first rain after a long drought. And he says it suggests that there is a go-ahead from the very top of the leadership in China. So there aren't talks yet, but there are certainly some very hopeful signs. Interestingly, we've also learned that China is quietly starting to exempt some US goods from its own retaliatory tariffs. There's a list of exempted US products covering 131 items, including pharmaceuticals and industrial chemicals, which we understand has been circulating among traders and businesses over the past week. So that's really just a sign that Beijing is keen to shield its economy from the worst of the trade war.
One thing that is astonishing is while the US and China continue with this and we wait with bated breath, the amount of damage that's being done to economies across the world is going to be substantial, isn't it? And long term.
Well, the fascinating thing is we can't really quantify that yet. All the analysts and the investors have been trying to work out what it all means, and we've been passing these corporate results as they come in. But the problem is a lot of these tariffs, aside from the baseline tariff of 10%, have not really come into place. They've been announced and then they've been pulled. So a lot of companies have just got things on hold. And therein, of course, lies a problem for the global economy, because when companies don't spend money and they don't invest because they're uncertain about the future, that, of course, will have a serious effect on growth. But those results aren't yet coming through yet. But underlying those decisions are already having negative effects on companies and on economies. But the result of all that, we're not going to see for a few weeks or months.
We are going to see quite a lot of companies pivoting, though, to sort of change their location of manufacturing. One of them is Apple, and they're the big tech names this week. There are quite a lot of results this week. How are the big names doing?
Yeah, really interesting. The Magnificent Seven have been a key focus this week. The tech firms and their results are really interesting for what they tell us about not just the health of the corporate world, but really for the global economy. These are the world's biggest companies. Apple, that you mentioned, is actually worth more than the entire 100 companies on the UK's FTSE 100. It's a pretty big company. When it comes to the T word, Apple says that the planned US tariffs on foreign imports will probably add about $900 million in costs in the current 3-month period. A pretty big number. Bear in mind, Apple turns over a lot of cash. When it comes to US imports, it's looking to make more of its US-bound iPhones in India rather than China. It's been ramping up production in India for a couple of years now, and it reckons they can produce about half of the US iPhones in India so far, and that number will grow as the years go by. Also of interest, sales in China disappointed investors. They were down 2.5%, which was more than expected. There have been some problems with Apple's sales in China for a few quarters now. There's been a concerted boycott campaign amongst some consumers in China. So it is a market, it's an important market, of course, for Apple, and it's one which is problematic. We also had earnings from Meta, the owner of Instagram and Facebook. Its shares jumped on the results. They were seen as very positive. Revenue for the quarter topped $42 billion, and that was more than analysts were expecting. Meta's advertising revenue is holding up well so far, despite the economic uncertainty, and ads account for 98% of Meta's revenues. The company says that AI is helping to improve ad targeting and personalizations, making some of those adverts a little bit less annoying, perhaps. But one of the problems for Meta is it's in a bit of a bun fight with the European Union. It wants to limit the use of personal data for serving those adverts, and that's something which really strikes at the heart of the company's business model. Meta, for its part, offered a subscription service to people who didn't want to have their adverts targeted, but the EU has rejected that. So that is a battle that is ongoing. And finally, just in terms of infrastructure investment, the company really doubling down on investments in artificial intelligence. Meta now says it plans to spend an eye-watering $64 to $72 billion in developing AI.
Ewan Potts, as ever, thank you so much for joining us on The Briefing. Today marks the start of Hollywood's summer season. From now, we'll see the big movies, and the box office ratings are set from now. Joining me now is Monocle's Fernanda Augusto-Pacheco. Welcome, Faye.
It's a pleasure to be here, Emma.
At the beginning of this programme, I massively jumped to a conclusion that Superman would beat dinosaurs, and I didn't know why, and I didn't even understand your question. But tell me why you asked me that question.
Well, because I think Superman, another Superman, and another Jurassic Park, they're two of the biggest films this season as well. And yes, we're going to start with some criticism here, Emma. This is another season of old IPs being returned. We have another Jurassic Park, another Superman, another Mission Impossible, more Disney live actions. Sorry if I'm sounding a little bit pessimistic, but there is a little bit of a lack of originality here. And I think the studios, they need to understand, because sure, it can be a bit dangerous to release an original film in today's context of the box office in the cinema industry. But I do think we're craving a little bit of original stories.
It's an interesting point that you make, that this fear that the Hollywood studios are afraid of failure a little bit, that distinct lack of imagination wonders where the decisions are being made. Is it among the bean counters, or are there any, or are we even looking at a lack of filmic imagination?
Well, I do think the fear they have is because of the high costs of film these days as well. So when you're dealing with a production that is at least $100 million of production value, I understand if this is a flop, it will affect, a lot of people's jobs and everything. But having said that, Emma, some franchises are good, so I'm not completely against that. I just wish it wouldn't be all that the summer season would have to offer here as well.
Indeed. So, okay, let's have a look at the runners and riders. What were you saying? We had Jurassic World Rebirth. That just sounds messy. You think this is your number one top prediction for the summer? I imagine it's going to be people who accidentally get chased by dinosaurs.
Yes, but this time Scarlett Johansson will be chasing from dinosaurs.
Oh, wow.
That makes a little bit of a difference.
Okay.
And I'll tell you a secret as well. I am a Jurassic Jurassic Park fan here. I think it's a great franchise. And the thing about Jurassic World, when I was looking at the numbers, it's one of the most consistent franchises box office wise. So that's why I do think it's going to be the top film this summer. And from what I've been reading, this new film, they're trying to go back to the original film from 1993. So they want to show kind of amazement. People going to a place where the dinosaurs are, instead of dinosaurs going to cities or parks, as it has been the case in the last films. But shall we have a feel for the film? We have a short clip of it. I wonder if maybe we should go to the cinema together to watch it.
I'd love to.
These dinosaurs would be too dangerous for the original park.
Please don't say they're raptors. They're raptors.
The worst of the worst? we're left here.
Oh,
That's so cute, isn't it?
It is cute.
Cuddly film.
And it reminded me of 1993. I think it was one of the first kind of summer blockbusters I was watching. So there is a little bit of that magic appeal of that franchise.
There's something quite clever about Jurassic Park, because it's just on the right side of scary.
Yes.
So you can get that sort of that realistic sense of thrill of watching Scarlett Johansson being chased by a dinosaur. And then you can take bets on who's going to get eaten.
Absolutely. So, and I think you can take your kid as well there.
Yes.
I mean, it is scary enough.
Scary enough to make you jump.
Exactly.
But not drop your popcorn. Okay, so you'll be seeing me and Faye in Jurassic World Rebirth sometime soon. I'll be the one screaming. Okay, so we're now moving on to Mission Impossible. People chasing Tom Cruise, or Tom Cruise chasing people off somewhere dangerous.
And that's
Do I sound bored by this? This is the problem that I think that we're highlighting here, isn't it? You can predict what's going to happen.
But the only thing about Mission Impossible, it is going to be the final one. I mean, but never trust when people say final one in Hollywood. The only thing I have to say about Tom Cruise and the whole franchise where he plays Ethan Hunt is that the lack of CGI. I love that about Tom Cruise, because when you look at Mission Impossible, the films, there's something organic about it, something that you would see in the 80s and 90s a lot. A lot of action films, they got terribly wrong in recent years. It does look fake. I'm not saying that Mission Impossible is crazily realistic film, but I like that about that franchise. I wonder if Mission Impossible The Final Reckoning is going to be good. Shall we listen to the trailer
Yes,
as well?
please.
What exactly is your plan? Your team has been betrayed, Ethan. All your secrets compromised.
See, that to me sounds like Jurassic Mission World Rebirth Impossible. It's the same thing.
I could almost hear like a dinosaur noise.
I heard a dinosaur.
I heard the dinosaur. I don't know what's going on, but Mission Impossible, I think you will be missed. I mean, I hope we have another great action franchise coming up in the next years. But, you did mention Superman. We don't have a clip of the trailer, but honestly, Superman, I am a little bit bored by it. I have to be really honest.
Superman talks very highly of you, Faye.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Superman. But some people, they have high expectations. James Gunn is directing the film. David Corenswet, a very handsome, nice actor. Some people are saying that it's going to do well, but on my crystal ball here, I see trouble.
I love the fact that you just call Superman handsome and nice.
Yes, I mean, he's a nice guy, right?
Damned with faint praise. But it is that thing. I mean, just going back to the idea of Tom Cruise, and Mission Impossible will survive as long as Tom Cruise can still work out to keep his body in tip-top condition. But once that goes, there isn't anybody behind there, is there? I mean, you just talked about Superman in sort of such a kind of a dare I say, a sort of flaccid term, that he's sort of nice and lovely. And it's like, okay, I want a cup of tea. I don't want him to come and save the earth.
And you did mention this thing about Tom Cruise after he goes, what's next? I mean, that's the problem with Hollywood these days as well. They're relying too heavily on nostalgia. We all love nostalgia, but even other films on the list, we have Freaky Friday, which is kind of a newer version of Freaky Friday with Jamie Lee Curtis and Lindsay Lohan, Karate Kid, Legends. We have even a revamp of Naked Gun. So yeah, Hollywood is looking at their back catalogue. I mean, but what next? We need also something new, right, Emma?
Back catalogue was pretty good. Fernanda Augusta Pacheco, thank you so much for joining me on today's edition of The Briefing. And that's all the time we have for today's programme. The warmest of thanks to all my guests and to the producer Hassan Anderson. Our researcher was Francesca Jilks and our studio manager was Elliot Greenfield. I'll be back with The Briefing on Monday at the same time. Hope you can join me for that. But for now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thank you for listening. Have a great weekend.